for those watching online especially, I want to remind you that we need scientists and especially engineers for the future. Engineers use science to solve problems and make things. We need these people so that the United States can continue to innovate and continue to be a world leader. We need innovation, and that needs science education.
Okay.
Can you make a sex tape on Mars?
I think so. It's 40% of the gravity.
Okay.
Just think, you'd be not floating,
what's
there'd be
that?
like this whole,
What's
like
40%?
less than half.
Edwin Hubble was sitting at Mount Wilson, which is up from Pasadena, California. On a clear day, you can look down and see where the Rose Parade goes. It's that close to civilization. But even in the early 1900s, the people who selected this site for astronomy picked an excellent site. The clouds and smog are below you. And Edwin Hubble sat there at this very big telescope night after night studying the heavens. And he found that the stars are moving apart. The stars are moving apart. And he wasn't sure why, but it was clear that the stars are moving farther and farther apart all the time. So people talked about it for a couple decades. And then eventually another astronomer, almost a couple decades, another astronomer, Fred Hoyle, just remarked, well, it was like there was a big bang. There was an explosion. This is to say, since everything's moving apart, it's very reasonable that at one time they were all together. And there's a place from whence, or rather whence, these things expanded. And it was a remarkable insight. But people went still questioning it for decades. Science and conventional scientists questioning it for decades. These two researchers wanted to listen for radio signals from space, radio astronomy. And this is, while we have visible light for our eyes, there's a whole nother bunch of waves of light that are much longer. The microwaves in your oven are about that long. The radar at the airport is about that long. Your FM radio signals about like this. AM radio signals are a kilometer. They're several soccer fields. They went out listening, and there was this hiss, this tss, all the time that wouldn't go away. And they thought, oh, doggone it, there's some loose connector. They plugged in the connector. They re-screwed it. They made it tight. They turned it this way. The hiss was still there. They heard it that way. It's still there. They thought it was pigeon droppings that had affected the reception of this horn, it's called. This thing is still there. It's in Basking Ridge, New Jersey. It's a National Historic Site. And Arno Penzias and Robert Wilson had found this cosmic background sound that was predicted by astronomers. Astronomers running the numbers, doing math, predicted that in the cosmos would be left over this echo, this energy from the Big Bang that would be detectable. And they detected it. We built the Cosmic Observatory for Background Emissions, the COBE spacecraft, and it matched exactly the astronomers' predictions. You got to respect that.
Underway here on Earth. I mean, you know, if the moon had erupting volcanoes a few years ago, well, a few million years ago, however you want to put it, you know, it's not like we've been up there burning fossil fuels.
No, volcanoes are not connected to the burning of fossil fuels. They're connected to mining. But the big thing for us, on my side of this thing, is the science is true. And so when you discover, the people who got really involved in climate change got involved in it often by studying Venus, the planet Venus. So the physics, the science that happens on Venus is the same as the science that happens on the Earth. The science that happens on the moon, in this case the geology, the study of rocks that happens on the moon, is the same science that happens on the Earth. So when you say to yourself, well, I'm going to ignore all the evidence of climate change, you're saying, I'm going to ignore the best ideas anybody's.
Now, when we go to the Grand Canyon, which is an astonishing place, and I recommend to everybody in the world to someday visit the Grand Canyon, you find layer upon layer of ancient rocks. And if there was this enormous flood that you speak of, wouldn't there have been churning and bubbling and roiling? How would these things have settled out? Your claim that they settled out in an extraordinary short amount of time is, for me, not satisfactory. You can look at these rocks, you can look at rocks that are younger, you can go to seashores where there's sand. This is what geologists on the outside do, study the rate at which soil is deposited at the end of rivers and deltas, and we can see that it takes a long, long time for sediments to turn to stone. Also, in this picture, you can see where one type of sediment has intruded on another type. Now, if that was uniform, wouldn't we expect it all to be even without intrusion? Furthermore, you can find places in the Grand Canyon where you see an ancient riverbed on that side going to an ancient riverbed on that side, and the Colorado River has cut through it. And by the way, if this great flood drained through the Grand Canyon, wouldn't there have been a Grand Canyon on every continent? How could we not have Grand Canyons everywhere if this water drained away in this extraordinary short amount of time, 4,000 years? Now, when you look at these layers carefully, you find these beautiful fossils. And when I say beautiful, I am inspired by them. They're remarkable because we are looking at the past. You find down low, you'll find what you might consider as rudimentary sea animals. Up above, you'll find the famous trilobites. Above that, you might find some clams, some oysters. And above that, you'll find some mammals. You never, ever find a higher animal mixed in with a lower one. You never find a lower one trying to swim its way to the higher one. If it all happened in such an extraordinary short amount of time, if this water drained away just like that, wouldn't we expect to see some turbulence? And by the way, anyone here, really, if you can find one example of that anywhere in the world, the scientists of the world challenge you. They would embrace you. You would be a hero. You would change the world if you could find one example of that anywhere. People have looked and looked and looked. They have not found a single one.
Richard, you know what I think?
I agree.
Not that you asked, but what I think on this is consciousness has kind of baffled us for a while, okay? And evidence that we haven't a clue about what consciousness is drawn from the fact of how many books are published on the topic, right? We're not really continuing to publish books, not really, on like Newtonian physics. It's done, all right? So the fact that people keep publishing books on consciousness is the evidence we don't know anything about it, because if we knew all about it, you wouldn't have to keep publishing. So what I wonder, Richard, is whether there really is no such thing as consciousness at all, and that there's some other understanding of the functioning of the human brain that renders that question obsolete.
To that, I've got to say, like, oh, wow.
Perfect.
Okay.
And am I like thinking, or am I just like thinking that I'm thinking? Wow.
Will you stop with
that? Richard. We went decades not understanding the precession of Mercury. It was this big mystery, and we invented solutions to it, like a mysterious planet Vulcan tugging on it such that its perihelion precessed. And that wasn't the explanation at all. It was obviously general relativity, another thing, not the original question we were asking. So you say you want to know what consciousness is. Maybe that's not even the right question.
How about this? What's the nature of consciousness?
Excellent. Okay, let's move on. Actually, Tracy, I think I want to direct this one to you.
Who's you?
To Tracy. That's not Neil.
I'll be happy.
Okay.
Get back.
Part of shifting our political culture, I think, is we've got to model for our kids that facts matter. If we know that the Everglades are starting to get salt water in them, and we know that that's going to affect the alligators and the herons and the birds in this place, and ultimately going to affect our drinking water. And we see the facts. We have to acknowledge those facts. We can argue about how to fix it.
And Mr. President, I'll be honest with you, I was born in the U.S. I was trained as an engineer in the U.S. I'm a patriot. Both of my parents were veterans of World War II. They're interred at Arlington. And I want the U.S. to lead. I want the U.S. to be the best in the world at the solutions and the innovations and what it's going to take to address climate change for the betterment of everybody.
We're getting busy. America's beginning to lead. Because of our leadership in putting forward a climate plan that was pretty aggressive, China, for the first time, has submitted its own plan. And what we're trying to do is now mobilize the world. In Paris in the fall, we're going to have a conference to see if we can arrive at a global agreement around tackling climate change in a serious way. But you're absolutely right that if America is not at the forefront, it will not happen.
That's
and
right.
Yeah, I always say to people, part of what makes America exceptional, it's not just the size of our economy or the power of our military, but it's the power of our ideas and the power of our example. And there's a good moment for us to lead. So thank you, Bill.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Great conversation.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Ham and his followers have this remarkable view of a worldwide flood that somehow influenced everything that we observe in nature. A 500-foot wooden boat, 8 zookeepers for 14,000 individual animals, every land plant in the world underwater for a full year. I ask us all, is that really reasonable? You'll hear a lot about the Grand Canyon, I imagine, also, which is a remarkable place, and it has fossils. And the fossils in the Grand Canyon are found in layers. There is not a single place in the Grand Canyon where the fossils of one type of animal cross over into the fossils of another. In other words, when there was a big flood on the earth, you would expect drowning animals to swim up to a higher level. Not any one of them did. Not a single one. If you could find evidence of that, my friends, you could change the world. One of the extraordinary claims associated with Mr. Ham's worldview is that this giant boat, very large wooden ship, went aground safely on a mountain in the Middle East, what we now call the Middle East. And so places like Australia are populated then by animals who somehow managed to get from the Middle East all the way to Australia in the last 4,000 years. Now that to me is an extraordinary claim. We would expect then, somewhere between the Middle East and Australia, we would expect to find evidence of kangaroos. We would expect to find some fossils, some bones. In the last 4,000 years, somebody would have been hopping along there and died along the way, and we'd find them. And furthermore, there's a claim that there was a land bridge that allowed these animals to get from Asia all the way to the continent of Australia, and that land bridge has disappeared in the last 4,000 years. No navigator, no diver, no U.S. Navy submarine, no one's ever detected any evidence of this, let alone any fossils of kangaroos. So your expectation is not met. It doesn't seem to hold up. Another remarkable thing I'd like everybody to consider, inherent in this worldview, is that somehow Noah and his family were able to build a wooden ship that would house 14,000 individuals. There are 7,000 kinds, and there's a boy and a girl for each one of those. So it's about 14,008 people. And these people were unskilled. As far as anybody knows, they had never built a wooden ship before. Furthermore, they had to get all these animals on there, and they had to feed them, and I understand that Mr. Ham has some explanations for that, which I frankly find extraordinary, but this is the premise of the bit. And we can then run a test, a scientific test. People in the early 1900s built an extraordinary large wooden ship, the Wyoming. It was a 6-masted schooner, the largest one ever built. It had a motor on it for winching cables and stuff. But this boat had a great difficulty. It was not as big as the Titanic, but it was a very long ship. It would twist in the sea. It would twist this way, and this way. And in all that twisting, it leaked. It leaked like crazy. The crew could not keep the ship dry. And indeed, it eventually foundered and sank, loss of all 14 hands. So there were 14 crewmen aboard a ship built by very, very skilled shipwrights in New England. These guys were the best in the world at wooden shipbuilding. And they couldn't build a boat as big as the Ark is claimed to have been. Is that reasonable? Is that possible? That the best shipbuilders in the world couldn't do what 8 unskilled people, men and their wives, were able to do? Shipwrights, my ancestors, the Nye family in New England, spent their whole life learning to make ships. I mean, it's very reasonable perhaps to you that Noah had superpowers and was able to build this extraordinary craft with 7 family members, but to me that's just not reasonable.
Even if what Van and the White House are saying is all true, the scare tactics have not worked. Check
Let me
out.
ask you before you go on.
Well,
You're
no, let
saying
me
it's
finish
not
my
true.
question.
Let's talk about the facts. You're saying that
No,
they're not
let me
true.
finish my question, Bill. I want you to take a look at this polling. Only about 36% of Americans think global warming is a serious threat to our way of life. Now, again, let me posit. Everything that Van and the White House have said is true. However, the scare tactics have not worked. And don't you need public consensus to move the needle on this?
So how do you want to get public consensus? By saying that it's not happening, that it's not serious, that shorelines aren't flooding, that we're
No,
not...
I want you to advise the politicians.
advise the
Because
politicians.
they're not, whatever they're doing, whatever Van is doing to scare the public is not changing public
Inform the
opinion.
public, but go right ahead.
Tell us
I think
how to use the science to actually change public consensus.
Well, I think get the message out that this is serious business. And, you know, if you live in Oklahoma, where tornadoes have wiped your town out a couple times, you chose Alaska, which is remote generally, but when you remember Hurricane Sandy, the bottom half of Manhattan was flooded.
Yeah.
The economic effect of that alone is enormous, let alone the rebuilding infrastructure and so on. And we're in the developed world, where people can get on the highway and drive. You know, when you say moving a highway 4 feet, it doesn't sound like very much, but you're talking about millions of tons of road that have to be lifted, and that energy has to come from somewhere, and that's just the start of things. And so when we start having crop failures and the drought that's in California continues, the economic cost...
Yeah, well, you can look at these things, and you can look at the climate realities, and even this NCA report says that the trend on tornadoes isn't certain. The IPCC report says that the trend on hurricanes is uncertain. We're in the longest hurricane drought. I'm not a denier. I'm not a skeptic. What I'm saying is the climate is changing. Yes, man-made emissions are in some part to that, but we haven't seen these extreme weather event trends. The observed data doesn't prove that.
Well, so I
More
disagree.
importantly is the policy prescriptions, these greenhouse gas regulations coming down, prohibiting building new coal-fired power plants is just going to make us less equipped, less economically prosperous to handle these problems, whether they're, more frequent and more intense
So let's
or
just
not.
start with, we don't agree on the facts, right? So this third report came out saying it's very serious. You say no. Right? There's the essence of the problem, S.E.
Well,
the science, the researchers say yes. You
Not all the
hoping
researchers. And
against
again,
hope.
even the IPCC says that there's no frequency or intensity when it comes to hurricanes.
Okay, hurricane, schmurricane, if I may.
This one
The sea
says
is
about
getting
tornadoes.
big.
It's the same thing.
The
Yeah, sea
ocean
level is
gets
rising,
big.
although it's retracted. It's increasing at a slower rate over the past few years. We've had Arctic
I
ice
think you're
globally
cherry-picking
increasing.
data. I think
No,
that's what's
not
wrong.
absolutely.
Why did this
not.
report come out?
But Bill, isn't it a problem when science guys attempt to bully other people? I mean, Nick here had to
bully
say,
me, but-
I'm not a denier. He had to get it up. I'm not a denier, because really, the science group has tried to shame anyone who dares question this. And the point I'm trying to make...
Thank you. Moderation on that. But the innovation is what's going to make the United States economy grow. And in order to have innovation, you have to have scientifically literate students being graduated from all kinds of schools. Now, this seems objective, as you say. It would seem like, who wouldn't want the United States to innovate? Isn't this the greatest thing?
Right.
But you have this situation in Texas where people want to have creationism in textbooks.
Oh, sure.
Now, unlike some other acquaintances of mine, I don't have any big deal about somebody's religion. But if you claim
if you
But,
claim that the
Bill.
Earth is 10,000 years old, that's just wrong.
No, they say 5,000.
5,000. It's just wrong. The Earth is flat. No, it isn't. And so this is to your point.
Well, I mean, you're quoting facts. How much do we really know about facts? See, that's the problem. Is that facts themselves have become subject to debate,
man,
and this must
crazy.
drive you fucking nuts. Right. Look at him. He's going.
Yeah. So
But-
no, it really is troubling
Well-
because.
Well, you are used to explaining things to children. Explain to Republicans right now. Well, I'm sorry.
Democrats in that bunch too.
There's not a lot of Democrats who think the world is 5,000 years
Yeah,
old.
yeah.
There are some, you're right. There are some. There are religious Democrats.
That's
But I mean,
all right.
you cast a jaundiced eye at me about religion, but isn't
No, I was
religion-
giving you a hard time.
I know, but
I
you
kid
should,
because
you
I
should give
love.
religion the hard time. I mean, I read that you were in, I think it was Texas, and you quoted
Oh, man.
Genesis
Yeah.
about, and Genesis something like God made two great lights, the sun and the moon, and you pointed out to the crowd that the moon, of course, is not a light itself. It's just reflecting the light off the sun. And they threw a shit fit and stormed out of the
A
room.
woman grabbed her kids by the wrists and took them out.
Right.
Which was kind of cool, but also
But you
troubling.
cannot see that and not know that religion
Oh.
is the enemy of science.
Oh,
and when
man.
people say we can reconcile science and faith, no, we can't.
Well, the whole thing is in science when you